Our first story is Tale of the Missing Liver from Carrie in Arizona. This is a story which everyone and their brother shares happened to a friend or a friend of a friend. It has a few variations, but this is the one that I always knew is true. There was once this married couple. Let's call the husband George and the wife Mary. Now, George and Mary didn't exactly have a storybook marriage. George was lazy, but claimed to be hardworking and very abusive to his wife. Mary was a very small and timid woman who took every bit of abuse from her husband. One thing about George that Mary didn't mind was his insatiable appetite. She loved to cook, especially for those who appreciated, and what can I say? The man adored eating. In fact, he downright loved it. So every day, George would come home from work and eat the dinner that Mary had prepared for him. His favorite meal of all time was liver and onions, a dish that Mary was especially skilled in cooking. One morning, before leaving for work, George told, more like ordered, Mary that he was going to want liver and onions for dinner. She, of course, obliged to his command and fitted making a stop at the market into her list of errands. That afternoon, she stopped at the butcher counter at the market and picked up a pound of the freshest, finest liver she could find. She made her way home and began to cook the liver. By the time she had finished, it cooked much faster than usual. This liver was especially good. The smell had heavily permeated the kitchen. Unable to resist the temptation, Mary took a small bite of the liver. Absolutely heavenly. This was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. Before she knew it, she had devoured the whole thing. Panic then set in. George would be home soon, and she didn't have the money for more liver. She left the house to rush back to the market, hoping the butcher would maybe take pity on her and allow her to use credit instead of cash. On her way there, she passed by a funeral home, which was having an open casket viewing that day. That gave her an idea. Mary walked in and noticed the room was completely empty, save her and the corpse. She quickly dug her small pocket knife out of her purse, which she carried for protection, and set to work. Heart racing, Mary extracted the dead man's liver and concealed it under her coat as she raced out of the funeral home. She walked quickly back to her home with the liver and began to cook it immediately. The smell again permeated the kitchen, and this time it smelled twice as good. Knowing it came from a human, Mary resisted tasting it. George came home just in time for Mary to finish cooking the liver and onions. He tore into the dish, making grunting noises as he shoveled the food into his mouth at a disgusting rate of speed. It wasn't until he had finished that he exclaimed to Mary the superb quality of the meal. As mean and abusive as George was, he always gave Mary credit for her culinary skill. That night, as Mary lay in bed, George snoring loudly next to her, she thought she could faintly hear, "Who's got my liver? Who's got my liver?" She dismissed the thought and closed her eyes and tried to sleep. About 15 minutes later, she heard a little bit louder, "Who's got my liver? Give me back my liver." Gripping the sheet, she closed her eyes tightly, the fear raising in the pit of her stomach. About another 15 minutes went by and she heard it again. This time it sounded like it was coming from the outside of the home. 10 minutes went by and she heard it again. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. Thump, 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 thump. Mary heard footsteps on the stairs. George was still snoring away loudly. The door creaked open and Mary heard whispers in her ear. "You've got my liver and I want it back." The fear that gripped Mary lifted, and she was able to point at the sleeping George and exclaim, "I don't have your liver. He has it." The only sound then was the one of George's scream. Next story, The Black Cadillac by Cheryl. This story was told to me by my older brother and sister. It takes place back in the early to mid-1970s. On the south side of the Court Square in my hometown, Noonan, Georgia, there used to be a Cadillac dealership. At the time, one of the most prominent in the county. The dealership went out of business a couple years after the incident I'm about to relate to you took place. For several weeks now, a certain man, always dressed totally in black, would go to see the dealership and admire one Cadillac in particular. A brand new, shiny black one with all the extras. The strange thing was, when one of the salesmen saw him and started out to meet the man, he would get in his car and leave the dealership, never allowing the salesman to get close enough to really get a good look at him. Every day he came, always at the same time, and always in the same vehicle, which was also a black Cadillac, only an older model. The salesmen were really getting annoyed at the man and his strange behavior, so they hatched a plan. One of them would go out the next day just before the man always showed up and get into the Black Cadillac and wait there for the man's daily visit. The one salesman, I'll call him John, went out and waited for the man to show up. He never did. Nor did he the next day, nor the next. The salesman decided the man wouldn't be back, so they stopped going out to wait for him. In the ensuing weeks, several people stopped to admire the Black Cadillac, but once they got in it to test drive it, it would never crank. It was checked from one end to the other. Nothing could be found wrong. Even more strange was the fact that the car would always crank fine when there was no interested customers about. One morning, while John was at the dealership alone, he glanced out the office window, and to his surprise, there was the man in black. Remembering his experiences with the man in the past, he didn't bother to get up and go out there, or he knew the man would do if he did. So he continued on with his paperwork and forgot about it. A few minutes later, while his back was turned, he heard the bell on the door ring, signifying someone had entered the office. He turned to greet the customer with a smile on his face and stopped short, for it was the man in black. The man could only be described as tall, lean, mid-60s to early 70s, and ghostly pale. The man sat down in the chair in front of John's desk, pulled out his wallet, and laid approximately $20,000 on the desk. John smiled widely. "So you finally decided you wanted the car, eh?" The man never spoke a word, just shook his head in the affirmative. No smile, no nothing, just a blank look on his face. Josh pulled out the necessary paperwork, handed it to the man, showed him where to sign, and told him to put down where he wanted the car delivered to. When this was done, the man stood up and, without a handshake or even a grin, he turned and walked out of the building, leaving the cash where he placed it on the desk. He got in his old car and drove away. Later on in that day, after the car was newly washed and shined up, the other salesman, John's partner, came in. He couldn't believe that the man had finally come back and brought the Black Cadillac. He was even further stunned upon hearing that the man had paid cash for it. John gave his partner, I'll call him James, the address where the car was to be delivered, and told him that the man hadn't even test drove the car. He simply come in to the office, laid the cash on the desk, signed the paperwork, and left. Sorry about that, I had to fix something. James, shaking his head in awe, told John he'd be back as soon as he delivered the car and left. The car cranked the first time and he was on his way. Looking again at the address on the paperwork, he racked his brain, trying to remember where the particular street was at. The address was lot number 3, Oaklawn Way. That couldn't be right, he thought to himself. The man had made a mistake on his address, for the address he'd given was right smack dab in the middle of the cemetery. He looked on the paperwork for a phone number. There wasn't one. How was he going to get in touch with the man, he wondered. He stopped at a payphone and looked up the man's name in the phone book provided. It was not there. He got back in the Cadillac and decided to go to the only Oaklawn Way that he knew of. He turned into the cemetery feeling foolish, but somehow compelled to go there. He found lot number 3. As he'd known it would be, it was a cemetery plot. Still feeling foolish, he got out of the Cadillac, looking all around the cemetery for the man who purchased it, thinking that maybe for some reason the man had wanted to pick it up there, maybe as a surprise for his wife or something. He saw no sign of anyone. He dropped his head, trying to figure out what to do. All he knew to do was go back to the office and wait for the man to come back or call and give him the right address. And as he was turning, he caught the glimpse of a headstone directly in front of him and part of a name. He did a double take when he read the full name on it. A chill coursed down his spine, for the name was the man who bought the Black Cadillac. He rushed over to the Cadillac and grabbed the paper he brought with him, just to double check it against the name on the headstone. The name matched, as did the birth date. The date of the death was 1 week before the Cadillac had been bought. How could that be? He wondered. It has to be a coincidence. Not knowing what to do, James got in the Cadillac and went back to the office. John, of course, asked him what was the problem. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," answered James. "Try me," said John. James told him about where the address had been and the name on the headstone. "You're right," said John. "I don't believe you. I guess all we can do is wait for him to call or come up here." The days turned to weeks. No call was ever received. No one ever came to claim the vehicle. That's the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, story number 3. The Hand by Megan from Ontario. Well, this is an oldie but goodie classic ghost story that is sworn to be true. It was told to me by a babysitter when she was challenged to scare me. It starts like this. There was once this painter He was getting on in age and didn't have a lot of money. There was an art exhibit that was coming down, and it would not only make him famous, but it would make him a lot of money if he won. The artist was stewing because he tried painting, but no matter how hard he tried, he knew his paintings weren't good enough. He began thinking about how he could win the prize when all of a sudden the most terrifying figure appeared. It was a shriveled old man with no hands and no eyes, empty sockets. It began to speak. I know how desperately you want to do well at that exhibit. I can guarantee you win on condition you give me your right hand. The painter knew the presence was evil, but at this point was so desperate he agreed. The next day he showed up at the exhibit to see the most spectacular thing he had ever seen, and sure enough, it was signed in his name. So he took home his prize. That night the presents appeared, and with one swift swing of a very large knife, the artist's hand was gone. Sometime later, the artist was enjoying his fame and fortune. He had made up a story about his hand, and he had basically forgotten about the deal he made until one faithful night. He was sleeping when he awakened by a loud tap, tap, tap on his window. He woke up to see the hand. It was begging to be let in. Ignoring it, he went back to sleep. Again later, tap, tap, tap. Again it wanted in. This time, the artist screamed for the hand to leave him alone. This, of course, a toned-down version. The rest of the night, he slept peacefully, and the next morning, he thought he'd been dreaming. Well, the next night, he was again in a peaceful sleep when he heard a loud crash downstairs. Waking with a start, he headed downstairs to investigate. He was rushing down, and the last thing he felt was a hand gripping his leg. He was found 2 months later. Neighbors had been complaining of a bad smell. The cause of his death, a broken neck, a nasty fall down the stairs. The call, by Anonymous. Lisa's parents were gone at a party for the evening, and all poor Lisa had to do was stay home and watch her 2 little siblings, making sure they didn't get in trouble. Wishing they were hanging with their friends on a clear and beautiful Friday night instead of at home babysitting the 2 brats, Lisa flicked on the TV in the den. The kids were in the next room, the living room, playing with their toys. After flipping the channels for what seemed like hours, she finally came across a made-for-TV movie that looked pretty good. A romance, her favorite. As Lisa started to settle into the movie, the kids came in, demanding that they were hungry and wanted something to eat. So while the kids took over the television, Lisa went into the kitchen to make spaghetti for the 3 of them. Just as everything was about to be finished, the phone rang. Lisa went to answer, but her stupid little brother got to it first and said, "Hello? Smith residence?" No answer. "Give me the phone," Lisa said, snatching it from her brother. "Hello, who is this?" Lisa demanded. "I'm near," said the voice on the other side. "Near where?" Lisa replied, but there was nothing but a dial tone. A little shaken, Lisa checked on the kids and finished preparations for dinner. She set up the table and poured out spaghetti for everyone. After everyone chowed down, the kids decided to take a nap on the couch while Lisa finished up the movie. As she turned on the TV, she saw it was almost over. "Great," she mumbled right before the phone rang again. Forgetting the previous episode, she ran to the phone before it woke the kids and shattered her peace. Snatching up the receiver, she blurted, "Hello?" "I'm closer," reported the other end. "Huh? Excuse me?" said Lisa. But once again, there was nothing but a dial tone. Lisa was bugging out now. "I'm near? I'm closer? What the hell?" she wondered aloud. Deciding to get to the bottom of it, she called the operator. "Yes? How may I help you?" the operator said. "I'm getting a couple of strange phone calls here, and I was wondering if you can tell me where they came from," said Lisa. "No," replied the operator, "but I could put a tap on your line, and the next time he calls, I could tell you where it came from." Lisa thanked the operator and hung up. She walked over to the kids and woke them up. She didn't want to scare them, but she had to have them awake in case of emergency. Lisa deliberated on calling her parents, but she decided that she was old enough to handle this herself. "I'm 17. I'm tough," Lisa knew. "I can handle this." Just as she was summoning her courage, the phone rang. Lisa told the kids to stay quiet and on the couch. She answered the phone with a faint, "Hello?" The weirdo said, "I'm here now, and my, it is so sharp." He giggled in the background. "Huh? What's so sharp?" Lisa blurted. "Where are you?" But the man hung up. Instantly, the phone rang again. It was the operator. "My God, those calls are coming from inside your house. Get out now and I will call the police." Lisa slammed down the phone, grabbed her keys, and the kids flew out the front door. They got in the car and locked all the doors. All of a sudden, police cars came roaring up the driveway. One car checked on the kids while 4 policemen burst into the house. They searched everywhere until they finally came to the attic. Upon going in, they found a young man in the corner with a cell phone and a huge butcher knife, getting ready to head downstairs. The Clifton Bunny Man by Timothy C. Forbes, Virginia. The tale of the Bunny Man goes back many, many years. Originally, it didn't start until 1931 after many murders already had been committed. For verification of the story, you can visit the old Clifton Library, located in Clifton, Northern Virginia. What I am about to tell you is entirely true, although I've never seen the Bunny Man. Everyone in Clifton believes it to be true. The bridge has a 1-lane car road passing underneath the dual railroad track above it within the woods along a gravel road. Back in 1903, deep in Clifton, there used to be an asylum buried deep within the wilderness. Pretty soon after the Civil War, people started inhabiting the area, population-wise around 300 or so. It was a very small town. Nonetheless, people didn't like the idea about having an asylum miles down the road, so they all got together and signed a petition stating for the asylum to relocate elsewhere. The petition passed and a new asylum was built, which is now known as Llorona Prison, a temporary facility until convicts are appropriately sentenced. In fall of 1904, the convicts were gathered and piled into the bus, which was to transport them to Llorona. Somehow during the drive not too far from where they left, the driver had swerved to avoid something, and the bus had started to tip and soon was rolling in a terrible collision course. Most of the convicts were injured but had managed to escape the bus and had fled into the night woods. Later on the next morning, a local police investigation had begun and they began rounding up the escaped convicts. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, weeks into months. Everyone was recovered after 4 months except for 2 people, Marcus A. Walster and Douglas J. Griffin. During the search, both men and the police randomly found dead rabbits half-eaten and dismembered every now and then along their search. Finally, they were to find Marcus dead himself by the Fairfax Station Bridge, now known as Bunny Man's Bridge. In his hand, he held a handmade hammer/knife-like tool, made with a sharp rock and a pretty sturdy branch as a handle. They thought nothing and cared not of how he died, only that he was apprehended and no longer had to worry about him. They had a name for Marcus, but later on they would realize they had named the wrong person the Bunny Man. While still searching for Douglas, they kept on finding a dead half-eaten bunnies every so often while the search went on. Finally, they were to name Douglas the Bunny Man from then on. 3 months passed by and the police had given up their search in April 7th, 1905. Everyone assumed the Bunny Man was dead by now, if not gone, so they went on with their small-town lives. Come October, people started seeing dead bunnies reappearing out of the blue and starting to fear the unseen. Halloween night came around, and as usual, a bunch of kids had gone over to the bridge that night to drink and do whatever kids their age in the 1900s did. Midnight came around within minutes, and most of the kids had left. Only 3 of them remained at the bridge. Right at midnight, supposedly a bright light back from within the bridge there where the kids were, and less than a couple seconds later, they were all dead. Throats slashed with that same type of tool that was found by the other escapee, Marcus. Not only were their throats slashed, but all up and down their chests was a long slash gutting them. To top it off, the Bunny Men hung both of the guys from one end of a bridge with a rope around their neck, hanging from the overpass with their legs dangling in front of the pass of cars. The women were hung the same way, on the other side of the bridge. This happened on Halloween in 1905. After that, they didn't see or hear anything from him for another year. Halloween 1906 was approaching, and parents, as well as the teens in Clifton, still remember the incident that occurred 1 year ago at the bridge. His bridge, Bunny Man's Bridge. That night, 7 teens were left remaining right before midnight at the bridge. Thinking little of it, 6 remained inside the bridge while one, Adrian Hatala, had remained a good distance from the bridge, hoping to have enough time to escape if the same thing happened again. At midnight, she witnessed only this: a dim light walking the railroad track right before midnight, stopping right above the bridge at midnight, and then disappearing at the same time as a bright flash was inside the bridge. She heard the deafening sounds of horrific screams coming from inside the bridge that lasted only seconds. 5 seconds later, they were all hung from the edge of the bridge, same style as the corpses a year earlier. Horrified, she ran home. She didn't tell of everything she saw, just spattered words here and there that some of the folk put together to come up with her story. No one understood it or even believed her. They charged her with the murder and locked her up in the asylum of Lorton. In 1913, the same thing happened with 9 teenagers this time. Halloween night again. Adrian was still locked up. They dropped her sentence, but it was too late. The insanity had finally conquered her. Even if she was released, she was too far gone to have a decent life, so she spent her remaining years in the asylum until she died in 1953. Shock. No one knows what exactly she died in shock from, but supposedly she had died in her dreams, dreaming of that one dreaded night. Perhaps the Bunny Man had finally gotten to her. More murders were to take place, however, although after the murders in 1913, most people stayed clear of the bridge on Halloween. 1943 rolls around, and 6 teenagers go strolling out on Halloween night. A couple hours later, all of them dead. Same way as all the others. Investigations took place, but as usual, nothing was discovered. 1976, the same situation occurred, this time with only 3 people. The only other incident that occurred since then was in 1987, 12 years ago, as of this writing. Janet Charlatier was enjoying the night with her 4 friends. Halloween night had finally come, and they had gone driving out to enjoy the night after invading the children's candy bags. They had settled around 11 at the bridge, waiting for midnight to come. They didn't believe in the myth, so they decided to see it for themselves and were bound to be the only ones who actually withstood the Bunny Man. They had waited around 55 minutes or so, almost at midnight, until Janet started getting a little scared. They all had been pulling pranks on each other, jumping out of the bushes and screaming, so she was already a little worked up. Midnight hits while she is completely freaked out. She's almost out of the bridge when the lights get really bright inside the bridge. When that happens, her body is halfway outside of the bridge. She sees her skin start tearing at her chest, but nothing is piercing her skin. She manages finally to exit the bridge, completely horrified as she hits a hanging body and knocks herself out. When she awakes, she finds out that her hair was turned white and she has been bleeding. She was lucky that the cut had just started and wasn't very bad at all. She left and never returned to the bridge again. She has been seen sitting on a swinging bench on her balcony every morning, just staring in the direction towards the bridge, a couple of miles down. To this day, you can still find her on that bench every morning. From then on, the story dwells untouched and unmoved. Halloween night, you will find a bunch of people hanging around the bridge, drinking, smoking up, but within minutes of midnight, everyone leaves. It's been like that for the past 5 years that I have visited the bridge on Halloween night. Even if it's not Halloween night, any night you go there, you feel the presence of death awaiting the night sky of Halloween, yearning for more blood to be spilt in his name, the Bunny Man. Here's the short myth. Halloween night comes around, nothing happens until midnight. Right before midnight, supposedly a bunny or two enters the bridge. Right before midnight, his soul, a dim light, walks the tracks above the bridge. When midnight hits, his soul stops right above the bridge, dead center, and disappears, only to reappear inside the bridge. From then on, it's his soul which lights up the whole area so brightly that you can't even see him. That's when he instantly kills you by slitting your throat and slashing your chest, only to hang you at the edge of the bridge. You can even see rub marks that have worn away at the rock where the bodies were swinging. Whoever's inside the bridge ends up dead. Thanks for taking the time to read this, and remember, everything except for the actual myth has been in Clifton's records since the date it happened. The old Clifton Library still stands, containing those records on microfilm. I have looked it up myself, and it's still a mystery. The Hoofprints by Betsy from Arizona. This story may not be known everywhere, but it's told a lot where I come from. I'll start out by telling you the setting. It's in the Arizona desert, mainly on a secret path that only 2 girls knew about. Their names were Janice and Susan. Susan was a really good horseback rider. She had her own horse and rode it every day. She mostly rode with her best friend Janice on a path only the 2 girls knew about. One day, Janice had to go to the doctor and Susan was left to ride alone. She took the path even though she knew it would be difficult without the two of them together. When Janice got home, she called Susan only to be answered by her frantic mother, who told Janice that Susan had not returned home and was missing. At 5 o'clock, cops searched the area, but Susan was nowhere to be found. Janice saw one way she could help. She snuck away and went on the path. The path was long, and it was almost impossible to make it by herself. It was soon getting dark, and having no way to see, Janice went home to find a flashlight. When she got there, her parents refused to let her go outside again. She eventually went to bed and fell into a deep sleep and had a disturbing dream. She saw a beat-up figure that looked like Susan with her horse nearby. She couldn't make out where she was at, and a familiar voice said, "Janice!" This wasn't an accident. All the evidence is right here. I don't know where I'm at, but I think I'm leaving. Janice was suddenly jerked out of her sleep. It was still night, but she grabbed her jacket and a lantern and ran towards the path in hopes that she could still save her friend. When she got there, it was raining hard. The set of footprints were still visible, as plain as day. She followed them until she reached an old burnt-down building with the fireplace still intact. It fell with a sudden crash, and the horse Janice was riding threw her to the ground. She painfully got up and rode further, towards another old shack that had also been burnt down. Janice closed her eyes in the hope that this was all a dream. As she said that, Susan's voice said, "Don't give up. If you can find the person that did this to me, I can go peacefully." Janice opened her eyes and rode to a dried-up riverbed. She heard the whinny of a horse and realized that it wasn't hers. A track hoofprints ahead of her suddenly stopped. She saw a horse standing and a sprawled-out body in front of her. She got off her horse and ran to the body. It was the same person in her dream. She put the body on Susan's horse and led both horses to Susan's house, where the police were still swarming the area. Janice fell off her horse from exhaustion and went into another deep sleep. Susan came back, only this time Janice could sense a feeling of warmth and peacefulness. She saw Susan smiling and was woken up by the sheriff. He took her to an awaiting ambulance and called another one to take away Susan's body. It turned out that some strange devil worshippers was responsible for Susan's death. In the newspaper, Janice asked everyone not to mourn because heaven gained an angel. La Llorona by Nina in California. This is a classic tale told through centuries of a woman who walks around the rivers of Mexico crying for her children. I was 9 years old when I went to Mexico to visit my grandmother. The first night that I got there was when she told me. It goes like this. Before Mexico was conquered by Hernan Cortez in 1519, there was an indigenous woman called La Malinche. She befriended Hernan and told him how he could conquer Mexico. She betrayed her own people to be with this man, and she eventually fell in love with and had 3 children with him. After the conquest of Mexico, Hernan left for Spain to marry a Spanish woman, leaving La Malinche behind to be the ridicule of all her people. She was hurt and angry that he would do such a thing, that she, out of spite, drowned all 3 of her children in the river. She then killed herself. Many people who would camp out in the woods can hear her crying, mis hijos, ¿dónde están mis hijos? Meaning my children, where are my children? I wasn't told specifically where in Mexico, but it seems to me that she roams all of Mexico. I heard this story told by many people. Again, this is a classic ghost story of Mexico. Needless to say, I was never a fan of camping in the woods after that. The Legend of Betsy Beaumont by Simon, from Simon in Missouri. This story is an old tale that's passed on from scout to scout at a boy camp out in the boondocks of Missouri. This tale tells of a young woman, Betsy, who was married to Joe. I have no recollection of the acutely name of him, Beaumont. Betsy apparently had dreams of being a great singer and hoped to make it into the limelight sometime in her life. That dream was cut short. She was driving down a country road one day when a deer wandered out into the middle of the road. She had no time to avoid it. The crash was fatal, to say the least. Betsy was horribly mangled and was only recognized by the distinctive ring her husband had bought her for their first anniversary. Joe was grief-stricken and moved out into the country and started a camping ground in an estate called Beaumont. After Joe died, he left his estate to the Boy Scouts of America. Betsy never liked Boy Scouts much. People say Betsy's spirit still wanders around the park, catching and mangling any unfortunate scout who makes the mistake of getting in her way. If you see her, what you're supposed to do is take a good look at her eyes. If they are blue, she's in a good mood and probably won't even notice you. But if they are any shade of red or orange, she's angry. And that's when you should be scared. There are many stories of children going into the mess hall late at night for a snack, and all that is found of them in the morning is a few bloody body parts. If anything, this is because Betsy has a taste for scouts. Betsy also likes to practice her singing voice late at night, and some nights you may wake up to her wails and shouts. It is said that if you are close to her singing, you will go deaf, or the noise will kill you. Also, Betsy doesn't like anyone commenting on her singing voice and will horribly maim you or kill you, so you can never do it again. So if you ever hear singing, it's best to just remain silent and pray. Well, that's the story told to me, and I would welcome any other version if you know them or had any experiences with her.